before we got on.
I just got emotional.
You said, so how are we going to talk about this? And I said, I don't know. We're just going to riff. That's what we always do.
That's what we do. Yeah, I don't know. It feels like for whatever reason, and I know we always riff, like we get in the car and we just riff, but something about this riff feels vulnerable. I like feel it in my body. I'm just gonna name that. I feel in my chest. I think, yeah, because I'm pretty avoidant.
You don't say.
I'm scared some emotions are gonna come up, and I'm like, oh no, oh dear.
Takes one to know one, my friend.
I know.
So we wanted to talk a little bit, and I think we've talked maybe about this topic in the past. I know we've brought it into our retreats, and I do feel like people have said to us in the past that there's something healing, I think, or validating in the way that you and I talk about friendship and talk about friendship as one of the ways through which we heal, right? And one of the things that I love about us is that we are really committed. And listen, even when you're committed to something, it can still be hard to like make your way back to it. But we're both very committed to this idea of decentering romantic relationships and prioritizing friendships, right? Like this idea that society has taught us that romantic relationships should be the end all be all. They should be the priority above all else, right? And then that means obviously that there's a hierarchy. So then other relationships fall underneath that. And you and I both fundamentally disagree with that. And I would like to believe that the commitment to that, obviously the commitment to each other and our friendship too, but the commitment to that is partly why I think you and I have been able to work through a lot of tough things in our relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, there's so many ways that, and we joke about a lot that we are the yin to one another's yang, and that like what makes our friendship so beautiful and sacred is that like we both hold with reverence the way that we're different, right? Like the way that I'll sort of be like, I don't know, we'll figure it out. And you're like, I would like to have some sort of an outline of what we're about to do here today. And that's the way that we become that thing of supporting one another in whatever our I was expecting you to finish my sentence, V, and you didn't.
Our journey? I don't know. Like our development
underdeveloped
of our
function.
Yeah, I was like, I think that's where you were going.
You were going. Like you knew where I was going. But like that our inferior function or our less developed function, we sort of support one another in those aspects of self sometimes. And then sometimes there's a way that, in all of our relationships, that can be something that we start to lose track of, like why that is what is so beautiful about this person. And, like, I think we talk about this in couples therapy all the time. I'm like, we literally pick the yin to our yang and then we make them wrong for that for the rest of our lives. And it's just, it's very human for us to be like, oh God, it's just do it this way. This is the right way, quote. And I think most of the time you and I do a really beautiful job of like celebrating our difference versus making one another wrong for that. That's where I was going.
Yeah.
But then also to what you were speaking to, I think that there's just also a way that, there's something about our friendship that just felt like sort of divinely orchestrated from the moment we met. See, I started to get emotional. In that it just felt like, I felt like the universe like placed this person in my path, on my path the day that we met. And I was like, I feel like unbelievably safe with you instantly. And you were like, come on, let's go. And you're like, we're just going to be friends for the rest of our life. And I think you said it that first weekend that we met. And so, yeah, I think there's just something really like we find our way back to that, even when all the things of life, the other things, the babies, like life, like we've always just like found our way back to that center somehow. And I feel like I've been reminded of that with you recently.
Yeah, I think there's something to this idea too of like, regardless of what relationship we're talking about, what I'm thinking about is this idea of like the spiral, right? Like the image of the spiral and how for so many of us, we go around and around and around these pain points, these wounds, whatever you want to call them. And I mean, I know you hear this all the time, right? Like we hear all the time, like, oh, I thought I learned this already. I thought I was past this, you know? And we really like to hold this like lifelong journey in kind of within this image of the spiral, right? Which is like, yes, it might feel like you're coming back around because it is like a cycle. But when you're on a spiral, if you think about a spiral, every time you go back around, you're a little bit further from that center spot, right? And I think it's the same in relationships. Like, I feel like with you and I, and this is something we were recently able to kind of articulate maybe for the first time, our wounding is so similar,
Mhm.
right? Like my partner and my wounding almost like is like a mirror image of each other, like a
Mm.
complementary, not a good complementary always. But I feel like yours and mine is actually really, really similar. And
Yeah.
so I think that this idea of like coming back around and around and around, I think that our relationship in many ways continues to bring up certain wounding. Um, and I think that's the purpose. I don't know. It is larger purpose, right? I mean, I think that's how we choose to look at relationships, period. All relationships. That's a very Jungian way of thinking about relationships, which is they are the platform on which
Mm.
this work gets done. And they are the mirror in which we are to look and see ourselves reflected back to us to be able to integrate the shadow elements of self. Like that
Mhm.
is it. That is the purpose, right?
That is the purpose of relationships. Yeah. I think you reminded me of what I was going to say, which I lost track of, which is that as much as we are they into one another's yang, and you said it, that I think we've realized there are ways that we are also so similar in the way that we process pain points. And that like our a tendency to just like go inward and I got me, forget it, I'll take care of myself. I don't need, that I think that, and it's fascinating because I don't know if you feel this, but like you and I will activate it in one another in a way that like other people, it's like you become one of those people that I feel like really vulnerable in that space of like it'll come to the surface in our dynamic. Cause to your point, the wounding is similar, but I think a lot of times the story we tell ourselves about what's going on here can be kind of similar, you know?
For those of you listening who haven't quite figured it out yet,
Like, what are
Dene
you
and I
talking about?
Dene and I just recently had a period of, like, contraction in our
What
relationship.
did you say? Contraction?
Yeah, contraction, expansion.
Oh.
Like, that's the cycles of relationships, and Dene and I feel like are on the other side of her coming out of a period of contraction. I'm thinking to myself, if I was somebody listening, I'd be like, "What
What
the
the
fuck are
fuck
these
are you
bitches talking
talking
about?"
about? I love that even in the explanation, you use the word contraction and someone's still like, what are you talking about?
Expansion, contraction, all relate. There you go. There's another nugget that we'll give y'all. Every relationship, you're all going to go through periods of expansion and contraction. There's no such thing as a relationship always being in the clouds forever and ever. Amen. Doesn't happen.
So, what do you mean when you say contraction, Vanessa? Like, what does that mean?
Well, we had a period of um I I had a recognition that I was carrying resentment.
Mm.
Um and that because this is my work, right? It was probably there for longer than I should have allowed it to be.
Mhm.
And so, this happens for everybody, the longer you wait, the more you get buried under it, like the harder it is to dig out from, the more there is to dig out from, right?
Mm.
So like the work, at least for me, forever and ever, is always to like recognize it sooner, right? And I feel like every time I do recognize that, I do recognize it sooner, but because when you recognize it sooner, there's less to dig out from, right? And so I had realized that that I was holding that I was carrying that, I was feeling like I was, doing more on the business stuff, all these things, and it was mine to own, right? As we always say, resentment is ours to own. And I was like, oh shit, that's on me. Like I was walking around carrying this. Um, and that's not fucking cool. And so I have to like speak on it, act on it, whatever. And I think that was not the thing that started it off, but I think that was kind of the thing that brought a lot of things to the surface
Hmm.
for us.
Yeah, and I think we're pretty intimate in our we know each other pretty well, and so like even if there's energy that we're not speaking to, we feel energy shifts between one another, and we feel like when we're not I don't know, like telling each other all the things, or like when there's something that's being withheld. And I think where we landed was that, you know, yeah, I will tell myself a story about like, well, we're just changing and like she's just, she's getting married and so she doesn't need me anymore and like whatever the story is that, my inner kiddo might tell myself in those moments, or how I'm defending against
Mhm.
the fear, the abandonment, or the hurt, or whatever the emotions are. And I think, such big ups to you in this case, because this is circling back to what you were saying about decentering romantic relationships. I think, and I'll let you, I guess, speak on it for yourself, but you like named it and you kind of like called me on like, I see what you're doing. I see that you're pulling back and like, get over here. We need to talk about that. That's like not what we do, but I'll let
Yeah.
you speak to what you said, I
I think
guess.
it was more like, "Bitch, I see." Like, as
You
an
might have said, "Bitch,
avoidant
I see you." That might be a direct quote, actually.
as an avoidant, you can't fool an avoidant. Like, I wrote these rules. I know this game. You can't play my own game to me and expect me
Mm,
not to know what you're doing, right? And so, yeah, it was like, no, like, we're gonna fucking sit down and have this conversation. Um,
mm,
and look, like going into and we've had a few conversations over the last few months, I feel like, that have been hard. And this is why I say, like, I think there's layers to it. I do think we do all evolve and we are growing and we are
mhm,
changing. And with that, can we kind of get to a place, or I guess continue to be in a space of reverence for the other person, like you started off by talking about,
mm,
and realizing when that starts to get kind of clouded, by the changes that are happening, right? Because
mhm,
I think at the end of the day, regardless of if you and I, and we talk about this all the time, and we're like, change is the only constant. We have to get comfortable with discomfort, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, we're still human and we're
yeah,
still uncomfortable with it, right?
yeah,
And so I think it was a little bit of us like calling ourselves on our bullshit and saying, like, yes, things are changing. Yes, we are changing. The circumstances in our lives are changing. And it's really kind of calling us into a space of, are you all going to put your money where your mouth is and like really
mm,
do the work on this relationship that you like talk so much about, right? And like prioritize this relationship in a way, that kind of gives it the I don't know, the value that you seem to say you want to put on it, right? And I think it took a little bit of us both like getting over our egos to kind of do that, you know,
mhm,
um, and coming into that space. And I, jokingly, I was telling you how I was like going off to John, not at John, but to John about it. And I was like, this is decentering romantic relationships and we're going to have this conversation. Cause he was like, well, relationships evolve. And like sometimes, and I was like, no, that is not happening with this relationship. Like, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about this. He was like, okay, okay. I still, I'm not the bad guy.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, and what's so fascinating to me is that it is so hard. Like, just to bring you guys in, Vanessa and I met at a cafe, and I think we sat down and like did like awkward small talk for like 5 minutes before we started talking about the elephant in the room between us, and then sat there and both like ugly cried in a restaurant
In
for
public.
another couple hours. But in that space, like, I feel more safe with you today than, I don't know, than like maybe I ever have with anyone. Like, I feel so safe because I feel like there are all these things that it's just there's such a deep healing, and like, oh, those are things you don't like ever like tell that person because you like feel like they couldn't tolerate that, right?
Mm,
Or
mm,
like we all have these in our like most intimate relationships. We don't really go there with that. And you and I were both like, okay, let's like every single like resentment that like maybe hasn't been spoken to. And I think I will give this to us. Both of us were really able to metabolize what the other person was saying without bringing in defensiveness in a way that like I was really proud of us. Like both like, yeah, I can see that. I can see where it would feel that way. I can understand how maybe I've done some of that. And I think that so much is the work of having these really challenging conversations is like, how do I just be so unbelievably open to my blind spots? because we all have them. It's just the most human inevitability
Mhm.
possible. And that if I love someone, I am going to hurt them. Even when that
That's
was
right.
never my intention, I'm going to hurt someone. And a lot of times it might be me hurting them, but it might be the way that I remind them of their mother that's hurting them, or whatever it is. But when we can speak to it, and I'm not going anywhere. And I think there was a point where you were like, I love you more than I've loved like anyone in my life. And the healing that my little girl felt when like I said things that were hard and you were like, I'm not going to ever not love you. I love you more than anyone.
Mhm.
It's just, this is what, when we talk about like we need one another as humans, that's the stuff. It's not the codependent, like we just stay attached at all costs, even when I'm unsafe with you. When you can say the things and someone says to you, and I love you, and you're still safe here with me, I don't even have the words to describe the healing that that does on a cellular level.
Yeah, and I would say too that yeah, safety is something. So a friend of mine, when we were talking about this, she was like, "It's something about the safety that you guys have built in your relationship that allows for those kind of conversations, right?" And I think
Mhm.
she's right. I mean, I think that, and for people listening, they're like, "Oh, that sounds amazing, but how the fuck do I get there in my relationships?" I think that look, what do we talk about all the time? Like, you're only responsible for yourself,
Mhm.
and so I think I mean, since I met you, maybe a little bit before, like, I think so much of my work has been around, like, how do I become what it is that I long for in my relationships, right? Like, how do
Mm.
I become the kind of person that I want to be in relationship with? And
Mhm.
part of that is safety. Part of that is lack of defensiveness. And again, not perfect, right? But it's a lot of this like practicing what we preach. It's a lot of like, if I want safety in this relationship, then I have to be the one to continue over and over and over again to attempt to create that in this relationship. And the other person is either going to meet me in that safety and do the same, or they're not. But that
Mm.
shouldn't diminish the way that I attempt to show up in the relationship. Right. And I say, that's okay. Like maybe you're not capable, or maybe you don't want to do that, but this is who I am. And this is the safety I provide. And like maybe at this moment, our relationship needs to dissolve, and
Mm.
that's okay, right? But I feel like even in my relationship with John, like this is, or my relationship with my kid, like it's coming back to like safety in relationship is something that I feel like, and I know most people will probably agree with this, is like such a foreign concept for so
Mm.
many of us, something that a lot of us have never really felt. And so it's just been something where I'm like, how do I recommit over and over and over again to attempting to provide that in my relationships? And then I let it grow from there, I guess.
I love that, P. I'm just so struck by, when I talk about all the time now that my definition of love has become your soul is safe with me. And
Mhm.
that's like fundamentally in whatever the relationship dynamic is, it's like, can you be yourself and you're going to be safe here? Like that is what it is to love someone. And that so much of what we're projecting on other people is that you need to be that omnipresent, perfect parental figure that I never had in order for you to be worthy of my love. And it's just like re injuring one another because we are going to be distracted and fall short and not, speak up about the thing that we were hurt by to the point where things build up. Like these are things that all of us will do in our
Mhm.
relationships. But the grace is when we bring it forward. That you're safe to do that, and I think that that's another thing because a lot of times it's like, and I've heard you speak to this in the past, it's like, none of us are gonna do this perfectly, and sometimes it's like, "You've been harboring all this and you never brought it to me?" Well, that and it's like, I brought it when I was able to, and when I was, able to wrap my head around what I was feeling, and I think that all of it is the different types of grace that we need to give one another because all of us are human.
Mhm. Yeah. It's so I don't know, it's interesting, right? Because it's also like when I think of what you were saying earlier, something about this idea of like what it isn't is like this codependent way of like staying in attachment no matter what.
Mm.
I also look at the opposite of that as codependent as well, which is like what Harriet Lerner would call like the cutoff, like quick to the cutoff, right? That feels like codependency to me as well, which is
Mm.
like um I just need to cut this off, and like I just can't handle this discomfort. Like clearly, whatever story I'm telling myself is the truth, right?
Mhm.
And like, it's too hard for me. I don't have maybe like the emotional resilience or the desire, or the capacity or whatever to be in this discomfort. So I'm just going to walk away from it. Right. And to me, it feels a little bit like the opposite side of the same coin. Like that's maybe that hyper independence kind of space that we get into. Right.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that one of the things that you and I are also committed to is like, we're not doing that. Because here's the thing, we don't know what the future holds. 5 years from now, like, I don't know, maybe our relationship does dissolve or maybe it does change form, but it's like what we're not going
What?
to, what we're not going to let happen is it do that without the respect of a conversation,
Mm.
and the respect of each other. And I also feel like that's part of your and my work. Um, I guess like in this lifetime, because I know that I've been quick to cutoffs before. I know that I've been, again, hyper independent, like can definitely run avoidant. I can definitely get into that space of like, oh, whatever, fuck it. It's not that, whatever, it's fine. It's not that big of a deal. And challenging that narrative again, and like attempting to be the one where I'm like, no, I'm going to attempt to provide this safety in whatever form I can. I feel like is something else that you and I are at least like attempting to be committed to.
I feel like you have to take a little bit more ownership of that. That's like, because I've watched you in your relationship with John, and I think the two of you do this work really beautifully. But I think our mind plays tricks on us when we're in that space of hyper independence. And it's just super easy to be like, see, here's the confirmation. I
Mhm.
can't be like, nobody gets me. Like, fine, that's fine. I just move. You've got yourself. You're fine. Right. Like, and
Yep.
my brain will go there. And it's not until that person like actually shakes you out of it, which you did with me, um, that I'm like, I didn't like it's like just so easy to bury the emotions, I guess is what I'm saying. Like
Mhm.
I wasn't aware that I felt as emotional and like scared or whatever that came to the surface when we actually talked about it. It was really dormant until
Mhm.
you named it. And I think that's just important to speak to, I think, because sometimes it's like the voice that is like happening in people's head and that I find a lot of times when I'm more in that avoidance space is like, oh, see, this is just like what we're like, everybody does this. Relationships are overwhelming. Forget it. I don't need this in my life. I can't do this. Just I'm bad at relationships. Everybody else, I'm different than everybody else, or whatever the narrative
Mhm.
is. Whereas a lot of times I think when we're in that anxious energy, it just becomes a little bit more clear that I'm anxious,
Mm.
whereas the avoidance, it can be tricky. Like your mind plays tricks on you a little bit, and it doesn't, because you're right. They are two sides of the same coin, and they are both ways that we are attempting to control fear and anxiety, either by pushing someone away or keeping them close. But I think when we're trying to keep someone close, it can be a little bit more clear that that's what's happening. Like I'm anxious and I'm trying to like hold on to this attachment.
I mean, I've said a million times how destabilizing it was for me when Stan Tacken said that thing that time where he was like, "You do realize that the avoidant is actually more anxious than the anxious," and I was like, "Oh, how dare you! You
I still
bite
don't
your
know that.
tongue." Like,
Whatever, Stan. Spoken like a true anxious.
whatever. But it's true. I mean, to your point, I think there's just a different way of masking it. I think it just
Mhm.
shows up. This is why we say that the hyperindependence is still a similar response to codependency.
Yeah.
It's just a different manifestation of the behaviors, right? Um, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think that, one of the things too that might be helpful to say out loud is like where we ended up or where we were able to end up. I think I said something along the lines of like, what I think I'm realizing is that I actually think that both of us being more avoidant
Mm.
with similar mother wounds, won't go too into detail, with similar mother wounds, I think that some variation of both of our kind of work here in this lifetime, like our soul's like lifetime work is
Mm.
how do I build deep, intimate connection while still maintaining my sovereignty and still
Mm.
maintaining a sense of self, right? And I think that it shows up in the way that we relate. I think that it shows up in the way that we were saying, like right now at this point in my life, like I am doing this work within a romantic partnership. You are actually doing this work really for the first time in your life, not in a romantic partnership, in your adult life, but it's
Mhm.
still the same work.
Mhm.
And I think that was actually, for me anyway, that felt really important to like name,
Mhm.
acknowledge that it's like the work shows up differently, but it's the same work underneath it all, you know?
Yeah. And it is interesting that you named it, and I was like, God, I feel like in so many ways that's like the collective work of
Mhm.
healing codependency because I believe that we are shattering this codependent paradigm that we've been living in for so long. And it is, how do I experience authentic intimacy between you and me and not lose a sense of me? And just got off a client call where someone was talking about, and I feel like I lost myself in that relationship. And it's like the most common phrase that people speak to when a relationship dynamic shifts or changes form. And it's the enmeshment template is what it is. And a lot of what I think, if we go back to the avoidant conversation, that enmeshment, that like the need of this other person feels suffocating a lot of times because we've made it so much that we aren't in a differentiated space of like really being clear about what is mine and what is yours in our relationship dynamics. And so that becomes really not sustainable because we are meant to shift and evolve and grow, as you were speaking to before. Um, our relationship will look different when we're in the golden girls phase of our friendship. Like it will be different. And yet, there are ways that's the beauty of relating. Like, how do I allow space for who we are both becoming, um, to inform our dynamic versus like being in the resentment of like what is shifted or what I feel like it quote should be that it's not, right?
Mhm. Or like holding tightly to something that doesn't serve either one of us anymore.
Mhm.
Um, you know, because of this narrative that we have collectively around this fear of abandonment and how, you know, the loss of a relationship is like the worst thing possible. It's not that it's not sad, but also like if you've done this kind of work and you're committed to doing this kind of work and it still feels like it's not possible for you to be yourself, then that's information for you about the container, right?
Mhm.
And last week in um, one of those circle groups I was running, for those who don't know, come join us. We have a private community, little plug. But in one of the groups I was running, we were talking about this idea of the difference between somebody not having the capacity versus
Mhm.
somebody not having the desire,
Mhm.
and how we tend to conflate those two,
Mhm.
and how liberating it is actually when we're able to hold somebody in more of a respectful way. It's not a one up position like, oh, they just don't have the capacity, but it's like more just honoring where they're at and saying, like, that's just what they're capable of, right? And that's
Mhm.
okay. And it's not about me. It's not a personal thing. It's not for a lack of desire, right? That's that whole like, if they wanted to, they would thing that you and I, tend to get a little irked by, because it's like, I don't know if I believe that, right? I mean, I think that we're all at different stages of this cycle of this spiral that I was
Yeah.
talking about, and to expect everybody to always be at the same point on that spiral at all times as you feels pretty egocentric, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I just think there's something so beautiful about the space in allowing things to be where they are without needing them to be a certain way.
Mhm.
And here's what I mean, like when you said that, I feel like so much of that, if they wanted to, they would. We're in a space a lot of times of, labeling something as problematic because we're looking for this person to be this like unconditional caregiving essence in our life. And a lot of times, where that person is developmentally, to your point, there are a plethora of reasons that they're not meant to do and be that for us right now. And I think, really loving people and allowing relationships to have the space to shift and change form. I was telling someone the other day, like, I look at my kid's father today, and, he's one of my best friends in the world, but I look at like how different he is as a human
Mm.
being from when we were together in a partnership. And it's like, Thank God, both of us. I mean, me too. I am not seeing myself as clearly maybe as I'm seeing him, but I think understanding that like someone doesn't have the capacity to be who you need them to be right now, a lot of times because that's what's developmentally appropriate for them.
Right.
And like demanding that they be that is wanting them to be that parental figure for us
Mm.
or that higher power for us, which is just such a negation of the entire point of our human experience and our development. Right. So I know I'm rambling on that a little bit, but it just feels like, yeah, like people need to develop at their own pace is what I hear in what you're saying. And if we give them the space to do that, not like holding them in like a specific container of attachment, a lot of times they're able to get there a little bit, more organically.
Yeah, and, like, I wanna reiterate again, like, when we say, like, they're in their own space or on their own level of development, this is by no means saying that, like, you or I or whatever are somehow above that person in their development. It's a different place of development, right? And I think that's really important to understand because when we find ourselves in a one-up position,
Mhm.
that's indicative also of some work that we need to do, right?
Right.
The othering that we tend to do of other people of like, oh, well, they're just not, they're not as developed as I am. They're not as advanced as I am in the emotional arena. And it's like, oh, let's do some shadow work there. Um, and I was thinking about how, as you were saying that, I was thinking, right, then that feels a little bit going back again to what I was saying about this whole idea of like, at this moment, currently in time, that specific work that I'm doing is being done within the container of a romantic partnership. And at this specific moment, that work for you is being done not in a romantic partnership. And the work is very similar. Right.
Mm.
And so for me to expect or need you to be able to see or experience, acknowledge, validate me, my work that I'm doing from the exact same position that I'm doing it from is pretty much setting me, you, us up for failure and vice
Mm.
versa.
Mhm.
Right? Um, I can't expect you to be doing the exact work at the exact time and vice that it's not going to work, right?
Mhm.
That this comes back to this idea of like practicing reverence for the other person and where they're at, and not expecting them to be anything other than like who they are and where they're at on their journey. Um, I don't know. Did that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. It's called fundamental attribution error.
There it
So,
is.
if this person does this, they're fundamentally a bad person. But when I
Mm,
do this, it's just the circumstances that are causing me to do this, right? And I think we do this a ton where it's like we don't think about when we talk about capacity, I think a lot of times people don't like, what does that mean? But it's like
mm,
all the other things that are going on in this person's life, all the other variables about like what's going on with their child, their pressures, their bills, whatever, that I don't think about all of those things when it's another person. When it's me, I'm aware that I'm overwhelmed. I'm aware that I'm flooded. But when it's them, they're just fundamentally like an inconsiderate a-hole, right? Like that's
mhm,
where our
mhm,
ego mind goes. But the work is really to be in that space of how do I give the most generous interpretation of what this is and why? And then, checking in with that person, being in the space of curiosity. I don't even know why I went down this rabbit hole of what it is. Oh, except that, that's one of the ways that I find we look to our friends, our partners to
mm,
parent us is it's a very young part of us that looks at other people in that way. Like, you should know what I'm going through. You should
mm,
know how much I'm carrying. You should know how stressed out I am, right? Like, we would expect that of a parent, but I'm not thinking just like we don't think of our parents of all the things they're going through, all the ways they're stressed out. You and I talk about it all the time. We're like, whew, starting to understand my mother a lot more than I used to
so much
because
more.
we don't have an understanding of what that person is living through until we're able to step into their skin. But I think that's our work really to like check in with ourselves around like, where am I attempting to make this person my higher power
Mhm.
or somehow less human than they fundamentally are because I have expectations of something that is beyond their humanity?
Mm. Hmm.
I feel like you just landed.
Yeah, just thinking. I was thinking about how maybe this is the time to make a certain
Mm,
announcement.
because you're talking about capacity.
Yeah, as we're talking about capacity. So the sad announcement is that we're
Mm,
going to be wrapping the podcast
mm.
after 4 years. Um, we'll be with you all until October. We've got some more episodes lined up, a couple that are very good, very juicy. Um, and then, we're going to come back on and do a couple more as well. But that was just part of the capacity, I think, was, just honoring where we're at this moment. Honoring, I think, a lot of the things that are happening in both of our lives in this moment. And for those who don't know, although I know many of you do, like, podcasts don't pay for themselves. Shit takes a
Yeah.
lot of money and a lot of effort and time, and we pour our heart and souls into this stuff. And I know, I know y'all love it, and I know we feel that, and we're so just honored. I think I won't speak for you, but honored to be able to have brought this, just grown. I don't know. Looking back at what we were doing and what we were talking about and who we were when we
Mm.
first started, I mean, I don't even know if I had Logan yet. Like, it's just wild.
Yeah, I think I actually do remember you had just had Logan, which is hilarious
Newborn.
to me. Like, you had a newborn baby, and we put her in the other room to take a nap, and you and I were just like chicken scratching on a piece of paper, like, what would we say as like our opener for Cheaper Than Therapy? How would we do the intros, and what would we talk about, and what would be the format? And it was really, the idea of this podcast was like fun. And
Mhm.
I think like you and I thought it would be fun to like try it out. I don't think we like thought it was going to be 4 years into something that I just got emotional again. That has just like gifted us the opportunity to connect with so many people that we've been so deeply inspired by, and to feel that we've been able to have an impact and share some
Mhm.
of the tools that have been most supportive of us and our clients with people who might not always have access to those tools. And, to me, that's just evidence of divine orchestration, because very shortly after we started recording, I think maybe we did like one episode in your apartment, and then there was a global pandemic. And so we were on our computers talking to one another, and it became just like a way for us to check in with each other for at least
Lifeline.
an hour once a week, which for both of us was just like we couldn't be with each other. So it felt
Mhm.
so um, it felt just like really healing and important to be able to connect with each other that way, and I know that for so many people, the podcast was that as well. Um, yeah, and I think I like look back at the conversations that we've had, and I feel so grateful for all of the guests that have come on and all of the people that have shared so much of their stories and, intimate moments with us. And it's just been such a gift that I don't think we anticipated it being when we started.
Yeah. And I don't also believe, like, I don't know. We don't, I've said this probably 5 times already, but like, we don't know what the future is going to hold. We don't know what tomorrow is going to look like, let alone a year, 5 years from now. So I also like to believe that it's just following what feels right in this moment. And then you just kind of see like where the universe leads you, you know? It's not to say that it won't be back ever. It's just to say that, like, right now, it feels like a good time to, you know, focus on some other things. And we were laughing before we started recording because it's like we're not going anywhere. It's not like you and I are like, bye. We're, shutting everything off. We still have our private community where we do weekly classes and groups. We're still doing retreats. And if y'all haven't signed up for January, you should do that because we are almost sold out, actually, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Um, but, there will be ways, obviously. I mean, and obviously you're not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. Like, I'm not letting you go. So that's still a thing. But yeah, I echo what you said about just being super grateful. I mean, it's crazy. I was talking to John and I was like, God, when I was trying to rattle through all the people that we've had on, and I was like, I mean, the opportunity to meet some of these people who have just been like
Mm.
so impactful in my life,
Yeah.
that we just never would have crossed paths with had it not been for this specific avenue. So I don't know. I'm grateful for all of it, and also just trying my best to like honor whatever this go around in this spiral is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's beautiful is, I mean, what number are we at? Like 260? I don't even like we
90?
record a lot
90?
of episodes.
God,
So you can hear our mouths
I
rattle
know.
off about things.
233. This is 234 when you guys are
Okay.
listening to this one. Yeah.
Oh, 234. Look at that angel number. Yeah, but I think I feel really proud of us. I feel really proud of um the work that we've put into this, and as you said, I think both of us are in a space where we want to just say, let's press pause or
Hmm.
stop while it feels really good. And, um, who knows where the future holds, but I feel really proud of us for also honoring that like right now, the capacity doesn't feel aligned. So let's honor that.
I have a really hard time letting things go. I am
Yeah.
a very stubborn Taurus who does not know when to quit anything.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I think being able to say that and like putting something down to your point while it's still good before it like blows up or it's kind of forced
Mhm.
is new for me. Might actually be like one of the first times I've ever done that, and I haven't had to like throw a grenade before I walked away or like force the other person to be the one that breaks up with me, one of those like I
Yeah.
feel like a big girl.
You are a big girl. And I do think it feels easier that, you know, we're still going to be doing things. And, again, yes, there will be lots of opportunities to hang with us if anybody's interested in hanging out with me and Vanessa. But yeah, just the day to day of like what it takes to, and I mean, I didn't know this before we started a podcast, but there's a lot of like editing and producing and all the things that go into podcasts. And it's a lot of things
Mhm.
while we're, still therapists, mamas, and
Moms and
all
all
the
the
things.
things. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, I'm
Yeah.
grateful for you.
I love you.
I love you. And thinking back to all those drives up to Pacifica, what birthed the
Shout out
idea
to
of the
Pacifica.
podcast. Yep. Just having these like nerdy conversations, about all of this stuff. And based on the reception that we've gotten for Cheaper Than Therapy, it feels like we're not the only ones that like to nerd out on this stuff. That other people were interested in our musings as well. And so it feels like we made a nice little community based on that.
You know what I just felt so good about as you said that? I feel like there's been so much exposure to depth concepts that, like, yeah, I feel like we made depth kind of cool, but also, I do think the therapist in us wanted to not abruptly be like, and this is our last episode. So Vanessa and I will be back for a few more episodes,
Yeah.
just so you guys are clear. But there's a way that I think we wanted to give you a little bit of heads up versus like just abruptly stopping, because that feels a little destabilizing to the therapist in us.
We have been trained not to abandon our clients. And so
We're not going to abandon our community either.
nope.
Yeah.
But yes, we do have some more amazing ones coming up, especially Reverend Michael Beckwith we've been saving his episode for you guys because we wanted to kind of put it at the end. So definitely don't stop listening yet. We've got more.
Yes.
But yeah, we'll be with you all through like mid-October. So catch you then.
All right, y'all.